Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Yuan Potts. Now, on today's show, we're going to bring you a special conversation with the Chancellor and the Business Secretary. Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds are in Davos this week for the World Economic Forum. And while all the talk among the global elite is about the new residents of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Reeves and Reynolds are there, you guessed it, to bang the drum for investment in Britain. They're keen to counter the loud sucking sound of capital leaving the rest of the world and heading to the United States. And politically, the Chancellor is desperate to rebuild relations with the business world after she tapped them for the bulk of her £40 billion tax hike. Rachel Reeves spoke alongside Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds to John Micklethwait, our Editor-in-Chief here at Bloomberg News.
Three bits of news maybe to deal with first, and the biggest and most obvious is Donald Trump's inauguration. He's already kicked off with tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Now he's talking about China. Now, Britain is an unusually open economy. I think we're arguing about the numbers downstairs, but by some counts, 60% of trade equivalent to 60% of GDP. I suppose my question is, how vulnerable are we to this, especially given the fact that we've already come out of the European Union?
Going around Davos, making eye contact with all your trade ministerial counterparts, you can imagine what is on our minds, right, and the conversation. But I think there's a few things on this. First of all, yes, the UK is a very globally orientated, trade-intensive economy. That is a good thing. That openness to the rest of the world will be championed by this government, and actually there are opportunities to expand on that. I think that's a unique selling point in terms of our relationship with the Gulf and the trade deal we're negotiating, our aspirations with India, the EU reset, hopefully maybe some things with the US that come out of this, the China engagement that you have kicked off, Chancellor. So, yes, there's a vulnerability there, but there's a strength that comes from that openness to the world as well. So let's recognise that. And the second thing is, look, we understand there is a genuine analysis in the US that feels that the very big trade deficits in goods that the US has, both with the EU and with China, the sense of unfairness that is the proof point of, we understand that. We might disagree, but we'll engage with that. Now, you're right to say we are an incredibly globally orientated economy, but also we obviously don't have that trade, the US does not have that trade deficit on manufactured goods with the UK. Amusingly, I said this to the Cabinet last week, but the UK and the US actually believe we have a surplus with each other on goods because of asymmetric statistical quirk. So there's the basis for a conversation there as to the future, but it will be a choppy time to be a trade minister. There's no doubt about that. But our job is to navigate through that. You don't get to pick the world as you want it to be. You get the world as it is. And I do believe the unique pitch from the United Kingdom can be, first of all, a return to political stability, which we appreciate after the Brexit referendum has been challenging in the UK, but that's also relative to some other European countries as well. That pitch to openness, and then I know something you'll want to get into, which is the willingness of this new government to use its mandate, to use the opportunity we have to fundamentally improve the business and investor environment in the UK.
So can I come on to that straight away? Because another piece of news is overnight you got rid of the chairman of the Competition and Markets Authority, and people conceived that as being a pro-growth, pro-deregulation, because one of the things about Trump is, yes, business people at Davos are scared of his trade wars, but they do like the pro-growth, deregulatory side of Trump. Is this a sign of more things to come in terms of regulation?
Well, growth is the number one mission of this new Labour government. 6 months in, we are building the foundations to deliver that strong growth that has eluded the UK for far too long, more than a decade of very slow, sluggish economic growth. And we want our regulators to be part of that growth mission. Now, of course, the regulators are independent, and the chair of the CMA decided to step down. But he recognised that this government have got a different strategic approach when it comes to regulation. And he recognised that it was time for him to move on and make way for somebody who does share the mission and the strategic direction that this government are taking. So, look, we wrote, myself, Johnny, the Prime Minister, to all of the regulators. There's more than 100 regulators in the UK. We've written to all of them and said, what can you do to reorientate your organisation to regulate, not just for risk, and of course regulating for risk is important, but regulating for growth. I've done it with the financial services regulators. We've now done it with all of the regulators. And I've got to say, the responses we've had, a lot of them have been incredibly positive about things that they can do.
Next week, there's been a leak ahead of it that you would say, go ahead with the third runway at Heathrow. That would be a sign you're prepared to take tough decisions that help growth.
We've already taken a number of big decisions on City Airport, on Stansted Airport, on a number of planning decisions that this government have called in. I'm not going to sort of comment on speculation about what I may or may not say next week. But Johnny started with a sort of pitch that Britain is an open, trading, vibrant economy. We want to remain as such.
To use your example of taking tough decisions, if you push ahead with Heathrow, that might cause problems with Sadiq Khan, might cause problems with your colleague Ed Miliband from Environment.
This is the problem of the last government. There was always somebody that said, oh yes, of course we want to grow the economy, but we don't like that investment, or we don't like that wind farm, we don't like those pylons, we don't like that airport, we don't want that housing near us. The answer can't always be no. And that's been the problem in Britain for a long time, that when there was a choice between something that would grow the economy and sort of anything else always won. Now, of course, there are other things that matter, but when we say that growth is the #1 mission of this government, we mean it, and that means it trumps other things. And so we're making pro-growth decisions in the national interest.
I feel that, John, as well. I genuinely feel there is, in the UK and perceptions of the UK, at the minute, people haven't quite recognised how resolved this group of people in the new cabinet in the UK are to make these decisions to make a difference, right? And I know that the proof points of that are not what we say or what strategies we publish, but the kind of decisions that we seek to make. When Rachel says growth is the #1 mission, that's about attracting private capital to the UK. That's about getting things done more quickly. There are things we know the UK needs. I mean, look, we could all tell stories of UK infrastructure that, there's a famous example of the M6 toll was sort of initiated under the Callaghan government, delivered by the Blair Labour government. We've got to do things quicker and better. And I think people don't yet quite appreciate how resolved we are to do that.
Isn't that, to come to the point, isn't that to do with, in some ways, the budget? People here, they will come up with a variety of complaints. They'll talk about fiscal headroom, which we'll come back to. But their basic point with the budget was they thought that came across as something that was not in favour of wealth creation. At the heart of it, it had big pay rises for public sector workers, paid for big taxes on business. And that is the main thing when you wander around the halls of Davos, you just come back from New York, that you seem to have started on the foot of being people who are not pro-business. So it's not just to do with these past decisions to do with Conservatives, it's to do with that particular thing with the budget. And do you wish you'd done things differently there?
When I became Chancellor, there was this £22 billion gap between what the previous government were bringing in revenues this year and what they were spending. It wasn't some years in the future, it was an in-year gap that hadn't been disclosed to the independent forecasters, hadn't been disclosed to Parliament. You had an idea of it because if you looked at the monthly borrowing numbers, every month it was coming in a billion or two above what the independent forecaster had suggested the government would be borrowing on a monthly basis. But until we were elected, we did not know the scale of that inheritance. Now, I said during the election campaign that I would never play fast and loose with the public finances. Liz Truss did that, the previous government did that, and it caused untold damage in terms of borrowing costs and confidence in the UK. So I had to get a grip of the public finances, and that did mean difficult decisions, actually, on welfare, on spending, and on taxation to get the public finances under control. And I strongly believe, and I think businesses instinctively know this too, that stability is the prerequisite for economic growth. You can't grow an economy unless you have that stability. So we've now wiped the slate clean under the sort of economic and fiscal mismanagement of the previous government. It did require difficult decisions. I'm not immune to the challenges posed by the increases in tax. But let's look at the alternative. The alternative was that I did half measures and then everyone would know that I'd have to come back for more next year, or I swept things under the carpet and pretend those problems didn't exist, but they would reassert themselves at some stage. What businesses can know is that our public finances are now in order. We're never going to have to come back again and do a budget like that. So we have the stability upon which we can now build as a government and as a country.
There's a limit, though, how much you can blame back on the Tories. I don't think anyone here regrets the Tories going. But you look at the numbers. The British Chambers of Commerce said that business confidence is its lowest ebb since Liz Truss's mini-budget. 2/3 are worried about tax. Half say they'll have to raise prices. Firms are already cutting back on investment and employment. The British economy is actually smaller now than when the Tories left.
You've given the bad news. Let me tell you two pieces of good news. PwC survey that came out on Monday, whilst you were here in Davos, showed that we are second to the UK as the place to invest for global CEOs. That is the first time in 28 years to the US. It's the first time in 28 years that Britain has been in that position. That is good news and is a vote of confidence in the UK. The IMF forecast that came out last Friday revised up growth for the UK this year and puts us top of the pack of the major European economies. So we can trade surveys and data, but, you know, I'm here to sell Britain, to talk about the strengths and what we are doing. We're reforming the planning system, we're reforming our regulatory system, reforming pensions, and also this year we're going to be publishing an immigration white paper. And although we know that we need to bring immigration down, particularly illegal immigration into the UK, we are going to look again at routes for the highest skilled people, visas particularly in areas like AI and life sciences, because Britain is open for business. We are open for talent. We've got some of the best universities, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, but we also want to bring in global talent into Britain.
There's no complacency by any of us. I would say the challenge of our inheritance has made us even more resolved to do those things that Rachel has described, because we wanted to do them, we thought they were essential. I think that case is even more compelling as a result of what we have inherited. It comes back to this. People should not doubt how resolved we are to make a difference. It's not just about the economic performance and what it means for our constituents. Of course, that's important. It's also about, to be honest, the legitimacy of the political system, showing people that, you know, government can make a difference to their lives, avoiding some of the populist pressures which are evident and discussed quite widely at an event like this. We know what's at stake, and that's why we're going to deliver.
Do you, on this issue, which you hear again and again from people here, this issue of wealth creation, I just saw Tony Blair walking on the street. He was famously relaxed about wealth creators getting wealthier. You listen to people here, they'll say taxes, you've got taxes on business, taxes on wealth, taxes on school fees. You've got small businesses spending all their time now worrying about inheritance tax. Non-DOMs complain, say you're Rachel Leaves, not Rachel Reeves, because they're all heading abroad. The record of left-of-centre governments that are unpopular with business or start on the wrong terms with business is not a good one. You think of François Hollande in France. You know, there is a problem there, and beyond sort of announcing some things around the edge, what are you going to do to change that idea that is out there at the moment, that you're not in favour of wealth creation? Maybe you can correct that now. Look, are you relaxed about wealth creation?
Oh, absolutely, and we want, as I just said, the best talent, the best people to come to Britain, create jobs in Britain to grow our economy. We had an international investment summit 2 months into the Labour government, £63 billion of inward investment into the UK, primarily in AI and in clean energy. That is incredibly exciting and shows the strengths that we have as an economy. I'm not going to apologise for the budget because although I hear criticism, what I don't hear is any real alternatives. If you're a CEO or a CFO and you're coming into a new business and you've got these massive problems with your finances, you have to stabilise them. And that requires difficult decisions. But if you don't make those decisions, you're going to be plagued by them for years to come. So we have now wiped the slate clean. Businesses can be confident of that. My instinct is to have lower taxes, less regulation, make it easier for businesses to do business. But unless you can have that economic and fiscal stability, then, to be honest, I think that you're not going to have any serious plan for economic growth. We saw that under the previous government. We've seen that governments around the world that get into financial difficulty. We have avoided that through the difficult decisions that we've made. But on every other area, I think businesses will say, on regulation, on planning, on pensions, on capital markets reform, that we are doing the things that are needed to unlock economic growth.
I'm going to come back to the issues of other things you could do in a second with Johnny, but first with you, this particular issue of stability and the issue, as you know, about fiscal headroom. You know, you left yourself a very small kind of buffer. I looked at 0.3% of GDP, or to put it another way, that's $9.9 billion, £9.9 billion against total public spending of more than 1.3 trillion. So very little margin for error. You've seen all those moves in the bond markets, which you'll point out have been corrected, but each time that happens, it kind of pushes through the buffer. You know, are you at some point going to have to make a bigger buffer at some time?
Well, I set out the two fiscal rules that this government will meet. The first is that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. Previous government didn't achieve that in 14 years, and that we would bring debt down as a share of GDP. We meet those rules 2 years early. We meet both of those in year 3 of the forecast at the moment. And in the final year of the forecast, there's a £9.9 billion amount of headroom. That is more headroom than we inherited from the previous government. We actually put more money into increasing
theirs was a famously small amount as well.
Yeah, so it's tight. And those fiscal rules are important to us because they are the sort of bedrock and foundation of that stability that I've spoken about. So we will continue to make decisions to ensure that we meet those fiscal rules. I'll just say another thing about the fiscal rules and why we chose to pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. That is so important for this government, to get a grip of day-to-day spending, because that allows us to free up money to invest in capital infrastructure projects, whether that is energy or transport or in tech, compute capability, for example. And we're only able to unlock £100 billion during the course of this Parliament for those capital projects, additional £100 billion, because this government are getting a grip of day-to-day spending. And some of you would have heard our Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, and our Science and Innovation Secretary, Peter Kyle, yesterday speak about the possibilities that tech have to transform our public services, to get better value for the money that we put into them by using tech better. The creation of a government digital app that will have our driving licences on and other things by the end of this year, using tech to cut out some of the costs in the back office functions of government. The more costs we can take out, the less we have to do on the tax side, the better services we will deliver for citizens, and the more we can free up to invest in that capital, the projects that can help transform our economy.
It sounds as if you're going down the same route as Elon Musk with his Department of Government Efficiency.
Well, look, we want to root out waste in government spending. I think maybe the
first comparison you've had
there. I'm not going to go troll presidents.
Just one last thing on that the fiscal headroom. You've got Johnny, can I kind of come to you on the issue of growth again? It strikes me, you look at a lot of the things you've been talking about, the Chancellor's been talking about, planning reform, infrastructure strategy, pensions reform, making regulators more friendly. Those are quite kind of long-term things. Whilst what business is looking for desperately is something short-term to make up for the tax rises. Is there anything you particularly can sort of focus on there?
I would come back a little bit on that, John, because I think what business wants to fundamentally see from us is, are we good for our word? You know, when we say growth's the mission, how are we going to prove that? How are we going to convince people that that is absolutely where our political priorities will lie? Exactly as Rachel has said, they've heard from other people, other governments in the past. They want to know, when you get that countervailing pressure, well, but what about this, what about that, what about that person not liking it? Are we going to say, no, this is the mission and this is the imperative? And we are. So I don't think it's about people just banking the long term, because the one thing the UK has needed in the last few years is more of a long-term, serious focus. Let's be frank. We've been bobbing along from one Prime Minister to the next, sometimes month to month, right? So they want that long-term focus. And I think that's where you get the confidence if people do not look at the UK, they risk missing out, right? That's genuinely the case, because this is a government so resolved to make the difference, because we know that is what we have to do. So I don't think it's a question of, you know, okay, people think the long term's great, they want the short term. They want to see that long term following through and the commitment that comes with that, and then they will see when, you know, some of the pressures, some of the conversations about the global trading position, the leadership role the UK will take in terms of open markets being a key part of that. I mean, as we both said, we want to stress we recognise the challenge of our inheritance and how we've got to, you know, provide people with the confidence and the certainty for the future. It is important to say we're still, you know, you benchmark, you know, payroll taxation in the UK still very internationally competitive. Capital gains tax, corporation tax lowest in the G7 with, you know, the best allowances available. So there's a compelling competitive offer there. But what you need, I think, to generate that confidence is people recognising this is a government serious about it.
You talked earlier about making government more efficient. We made the joke about Elon Musk, but there was a point behind that. One of the complaints that business people had about your budget, there was this very large pay rises going out to the health and things like that, but without a kind of attached bits of reform with that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to make government more efficient, you'd like to see more evidence that that's actually beginning to happen.
Well, let's just remember where we were on the NHS when we came into government. Right? There have been so many strikes that was having a detrimental impact on business as well as individuals. Because when people are waiting months and months, sometimes years, to get the appointments and the procedures and the operations that they need, they're not available for work. We've got a problem in Britain that participation in the labour market is lower than it was going into the pandemic. We've got to sort that out. Some of that is about reforming the benefits system. We're going to do that. And some of it is about making our National Health Service work better. I don't think there's a business person that would have said 7 months ago before we came into office, you know, everything's fine with the National Health Service and making sure we've got a healthy labour market. That was a problem, and we fixed it by resolving that industrial action that had plagued our National Health Service for a long period of time. But, you know, Wes Streeting, our Health Secretary, is absolutely reforming the National Health Service, making more use of the private sector, for example, more drop-in clinics local to where people live, using technology better so that people can choose when and where they have their appointments. So we are absolutely using reform alongside making sure that we resolve that industrial action. Another area where there's massive opportunity in the NHS, going back to this issue around tech and data, is using data in the NHS to bring in money, but also to make Britain the best place in the world to do clinical trials. Massive opportunities there because of our integrated health service.
Something you said earlier, I think the message you were trying to put across is that your first priority is going to be to sort out spending now. Now you've got everything, hopefully on a firm thing, you're going to sort out spending before remotely thinking about the chance of more taxes or anything like that. And if you would actually also like to cut taxes in the future.
I would like taxes to be lower on people and on businesses, but I'm not going to play fast and loose with the public finances, because in the end you actually don't result in anyone being better off, because it sends interest rates soaring if you lose control of the public finances. So I'm not going down that route. But if we can run the state better, if we can run public services better, if we can bring investment into the UK and grow the economy, we don't have to keep ratcheting up taxes to make the sums add up. That's where I would like to be, but we're not in that place yet.
But is there a certain level of growth, a certain level of something where you think you would then feel happier about reducing taxes again?
Well, look, I would like to reduce the burden of taxes, but I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. Previous governments here and around in the UK and around the world make promises they can't keep. I'm not going to be that sort of Chancellor. We're not going to be that sort of government. But I think you can see my instincts is to do everything I can to make Britain a great place to do business and to invest. As Venkat from Barclays, I think, was saying yesterday, there's huge potential in the UK. We're just 6 months in as a government. We are taking the steps that are necessary to grow the economy. Can't turn everything around overnight, But I think people can see in all of the reform that we're driving forward that we are determined to turn around the low growth performance that has dogged Britain for too long now.
And I would just say on that, I mean, from my perspective as a government department, I'm absolutely convinced we could spend money as a country in a better way. You know, our industrial strategy is partly about coordinating government policy across a whole range of departments. I look at how we've done that as a country in the past. Did we get the effectiveness of that? You know, when we look at the different regulatory burdens in different departments, who considers the aggregate burden on business? I'm convinced we could do that. And we know, the media always want to know, you're going to spend more or less on something, or regulation more or less of it. It's not that. You know, it's about the proportionality of those things, the effectiveness of that. And we're up for that conversation, because that's how we'll make the biggest difference.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds speaking to our Editor-in-Chief, John Micklethwait. The Chancellor saying that when it comes to major infrastructure projects, quote, the answer can't always be no. I get a sense that we're heading into a period where we're going to get a lot more of this, and some of it, perhaps most of it, will be controversial. Bloomberg reporting just early this week the government is going to greenlight the expansion of Heathrow Airport, and that is perhaps the most controversial project of them all. If you can get that over the line, then they'll be able to say that they've achieved something finally the UK has been talking about for literally decades. Well, that's it for today's show. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This episode was produced by James Walcock, and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamachia. I'm Yuan Potts. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.